Hello, and welcome back to the Rebuilt Parish podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Wilkinson, and I'm so grateful that I get to be here with you. Today on the podcast, we've got our subject matter expert, Ed Bradley, who is a staff member both at Church of the Nativity and Rebuilt Parish. Ed was in on the ground floor as Rebuilt Parish was established and was there when each strategic anchor was developed. Get ready to learn the framework all about parish renewal. Well, Ed, thank you so much for being with us here today. We're so excited to have you.
Well, I'm really grateful to be here, Melissa, and to be a part of the Rebuilt podcast is a thrill for me too.
Well, Ed, as we get started, I would love for you to share a little bit about your history with Nativity and with Rebuilt.
Sure, happy to. My wife and I have been part of the parish for probably 20 years at this point. And then with regard to my role at Rebuilt, I actually joined the parish staff about 9 years ago after a long capital markets career, was maybe available for transition, shall we say, just in terms of discerning sort of what was next. And I was involved at the parish with parish council and in some other ways. And we were getting ready to build the new sanctuary at Nativity and strategic planning and interviewing people to help us raise money to do a capital campaign. And Holy Spirit kind of talked to me and said, maybe you could help raise the money. And so actually came on staff as the stewardship director, a title I continue to hold today at Nativity. But this was 9 years ago, and it was right around the time the book was originally published. And that book kind of put Nativity, Father White, and Tom Corcoran on the map. And it led to a lot of inquiry into, hey, can you help us? Or what do you think? How can we do what kind of some of this stuff? And so I came alongside Tom Corcoran primarily in terms of working with other parishes. I became a primary liaison to other parishes, and so was involved from the early days of our teaching church activities at Nativity in terms of the work of Rebuilt.
Well, Ed, there are so many things about what you said that get me so excited about your journey. And that first one is how you listened to the promptings of the Holy Spirit and you took that corporate experience and applied it into parish life. And there are so many ways that anyone can get out there and do that. And I know that some of our listeners are just, first of all, some of those ministers or volunteers at their parishes. And Ed, you have such a great story to tell about how you started out as a volunteer and then put those corporate skills to work to help the mission of the parish.
Well, that trajectory has kind of led to a lot of conversations with a lot of folks who sometimes feel like, what's next for me? And it doesn't have to mean a full transition like kind of the path I did, but looking for ways to serve with purpose. And we are blessed at Rebuilt to have many very professional, accomplished people working in our organization as coaches with other parishes that we work with, all the while continuing in their professional career as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to mean sort of the full-scale transition that I did.
Absolutely. Such a great point that people can serve also while still continuing those full-time careers. But that's one of those steps of discipleship, which I'm excited that we're going to get to talk about that.
We will talk about serving, won't we? Yes.
Yes, we definitely will. Well, Ed, I brought you on today, especially to talk about our 4 strategic anchors. You are our subject matter expert on these. And could you please just give us a little bit of background about how these came about? How were they developed? Tell us more.
Well, when you talk about sort of the Rebuilt strategic anchors, I think as hard as it may sound to say, you have to kind of start at the very beginning in terms of like, why does the church exist, right? And I think so when you think about sort of the anchors, we'll move into that, but kind of why does the church exist? And that's where you get back to sort of the Great Commandment and the Great Commission and love God, and then share, the story of Christ, make disciples of all nations, the Great Commandment, Great Commission. That's at the end of the day, everything is about discipleship, and the anchors kind of reflect that. And we have to remember that as we think about the work of the parish, and that the lens we view what we're doing is through the lens of discipleship, and are our activities moving the needle of discipleship. So what are the strategic anchors, and why are they the strategic anchors? They grew out of the kind of lived experience of nativity, certainly, but they aren't exclusive to nativity in any way, shape, or form. They are what we like to call successful traits. I mean, the traits of successful parishes, and we've borrowed many of these ideas, and even in the early days of Rebuilt, we didn't necessarily have these specific four anchors as our work. It's really kind of evolved over time, and Tom Corcoran primarily has brought them all together. But at the end of the day, what are the anchors? Why are the anchors? They're what our experience and our observations of successful churches have shown us to be very successful, tried and true, proven strategies to help you build in your community a healthy parish. And so that's why they're the anchors. And then to give you a sense for what they are, let me take a moment on that, if that's okay.
Please.
Because you shared them, you rattled them right off. It's like, we want to grow wider. Well, what's that mean? We want to welcome outsiders. We want to have an exceptional mass experience. And we want to encourage everybody to grow deeper in their discipleship, and everything comes together through leadership. Well, let's unpack that just a little bit, and then we're going to unpack it one by one. But I think it's helpful to hear the anchors in a little bit of an elevator speech, let's just say, in terms of if someone were to say, what are the four strategic anchors? I like to share them in this way. Okay.
Let's hear it.
All right. The anchors: becoming the healthiest parish you can be, I would say, begins with an attitude. It begins with a burden of who isn't coming to our parish. And so you want to grow wider as a community. And in order to do that, you want to be very welcoming to outsiders. So you want to be very intentional about growing wider as a community. And when folks come to your parish, you want them to have an awesome experience. And that is, the Mass is the source of some of our faith. The weekend experience, that's when people show up. You want that experience to be great. And it's driven by music, message, and ministry. Music that is stirring and calls people into worship and is uplifting. Homilies that speak into people's lives. And all of it the whole weekend is an energy, a vibe, and a feel that ministers create. So that's an awesome experience when folks show up, and it calls people deeper into their faith. And so it happens at Mass, but then it also happens beyond that. Everything's about discipleship. Remember, we want to grow deeper as disciples and encourage everybody to do that. That's the grow deeper anchor. But it's more than that. It's shaping a clear discipleship path. And you have to remember, each of these anchors has that little tagline. And for some, that's critically important. And in this one, it is. We'll speak to this in a minute. But we as parish leaders encourage people to go deeper into their faith. And so how do you do that? What are the practices? What are the steps? We'll talk about the steps of discipleship that have people go deeper in their faith. And then everything in the parish comes together with leadership. It starts at the top with a senior team, but it cascades. You create layers of leadership that makes everything happen in the parish. Those are the four strategic anchors, and that's how you grow a healthy parish in your community.
Wow, Ed, that's amazing. So let me just recap for our listeners here, because you have a way of eloquently tying them all in together. So that first one you shared was grow wider, then weekend experience, then grow deeper, and lastly, leadership.
Exactly.
Well, I'm excited for you to dive into these for us. Which one did you want to start with?
Well, the way I laid it out, how about we do it that way? That seems logical. Let's start with grow wider.
That's perfect. Why is it so important to grow wider?
I love that you said why. I think for each one of these anchors, we have to have a why. And then we can talk about sort of the how to execute on these anchors, because each of these ideas has some executing elements connected to it. But you do start with why. And it's important to have your why. You want to encourage ourselves in our work. You want to know why we're doing this, but you also want to create some language around it so that you can communicate the why. It's important as parish leaders to be, casting vision and bringing people, providing that leadership, bringing people along. And so the why for each of the anchors is important from a communication standpoint. So why grow wider? The easy answer, of course, is we're called to evangelization, right? And the last thing Jesus said on earth, in Matthew 28 is, go make disciples of all nations. So it does matter to God. This is God's will for his church, that it grow and that we grow wider. So you remember the Great Commission. You also remember in Mark 1, when Jesus is calling disciples, he's talking about making fishers of men, right? So that's an outreach idea. In Acts of the Apostles, time and again, he talks about things that are happening in the early church. And then the scriptures speak to, and many were added to their numbers. That growth, it matters to God. It is God's will for the church that we grow wider. So, let's have that burden. Let's have that attitude of growing wider. That's the why behind why it's important to be growing wider.
Wow, thank you for that, Ed. Well, I have another question for you. Could you maybe share with us some specific strategies or initiatives that Rebuilt has implemented, not only at Church of the Nativity, but how we've helped some other parishes grow wider?
Yeah, I want to share with you that for each of these anchors, we have kind of 6 underlying executing elements. We spoke about the how, it's God's will, but then we spoke about the why, it's God's will, and then now the how. And each of these have what we call executing elements, and we like to show them graphically in what we call a flywheel. And the purpose of that is that these are everything we do in a parish. This is an eternal game. This is not an idea that you implement and you're done. Everything that we do in a parish should be evaluated on an ongoing basis, should be tweaked, should be improved, and try new ideas. So it's this spinning evolution, ongoing work of the parish. It's an eternal game. And so the flywheel. So there are 6 executing elements, and some of the ones for Grow Wider is to have a strong idea about who you're aiming for. What's your target audience? And to be intentional and strategic about how you are targeting your demographics in your community to reach the unchurched. So that's one. You should have kids programs that are exciting and that kids want to be a part of. And that's an important one. It's important to have a strong digital presence because people will check you out online and you want to have, that's the front door of the parish. These are all some of the executing elements of it. But a very critical one, and the one I'd like to really focus on, especially when you're talking about growing wider, is what we call invest and invite. And this is one that actually shows up in other places as well in the strategic anchors. And when you look at all the anchors and all the executing elements, you see holistically how they tie together and how they work in conjunction with each other. But invest and invite, what does that mean? As a business guy, you mentioned, bringing a business focus to things. And I don't want this to sound inappropriate in any way, but your best sales force is your congregation. They are the ones who are out in the community with relationships, and they're going to be your first line of attack, if you will, in terms of reaching outsiders, right? So invest and invite. What's that idea mean? Well, encouraging your congregation to be investing in people in their lives. And when the time is right, invite them to church. And as parish leaders, we can help them do that. There are a lot of strategies around the right moments for people to make the invitation, and we can provide them the tools to help them do that. I don't want to get sort of too deep into that, but the important thing is to encourage your congregation to be investing in people, and to make the invitation to church. Now, from a parish leader perspective, what's important to know and understand, and you can see how the elements joined together, is if you are going to be asking your parishioners to be making the invitation, you have to give them confidence to what they are inviting people to. And so that's where the weekend experience and that exceptionality and doing everything great on the weekend is tied to invest and invite, because it's like a covenant you have with your congregation that you're going to provide an exceptional experience for that person who they invite to Mass. So that's a sort of a link to how the anchors kind of tie together as you listen and think about all the anchors together.
That's so good. And I'm sure we've got people who are trying to furiously take notes on everything you're saying, Ed. And I want to let our listeners know that if you take a look in the show notes today, we will have all 4 anchors for you along with those flywheels so that you can get a visual picture of what Ed was just describing. So no need to panic. We'll have those right there for you. Well, Ed, you've done a beautiful job of laying out the framework for that first anchor, that Grow Wider anchor, and also shared how it ties into the next one that we'll get to talk about in a minute. But I want to know, do you have a story of how you've seen parish transformation with that Grow Wider anchor?
Yeah, I think, a couple of ways. I think probably the biggest one with Grow Wider in terms of parish impact has been children's liturgy of the word comes to mind. One of the executing elements is the importance of really powerful kids and student programs. And if you want to grow younger, capture the kids is a powerful way to capture the parents and do something nice for my kid, and you're doing something nice for me, right? And that's all true in church world as well. But if you can get kids waking up on Sunday morning saying, "Do we get to go to church today?" Then the parents are going to come along with them anyway. So exceptional kids and student programs is a very critical one in terms of getting younger and growing wider. We make children's liturgy of the word lesson plans and content available through our content, and all of our coaching clients have access to that as well. And we have dozens, hundreds of parishes who use our children's liturgy of the word lesson plans. And I received kind of testimonies time and again from what a difference, what a step our children's liturgy of the word has taken kind of with your help and guidance. And so that's a very, very satisfying, if you will, aspect is hearing some of those stories from parishes. And children's liturgy of the word is a powerful place to start. And it's not necessarily that difficult necessarily to implement a good children's liturgy of the word program.
I agree with you, Ed. And I think one of my favorite things about this job is getting to see the impact that we're making on other parishes. I love when I get to talk to a parish and hear their success stories about how they've doubled their participation in children's programs because they've utilized the framework that we set forth with children's liturgy of the word. And that's just one example. But I'm so thankful
and really,
that's what you brought up.
Absolutely. I'm sorry there, Melissa. And as I mentioned, it's not necessarily that hard. You can implement it easily, and we're not talking about things that are crazy rocket science. It's really have the kids come in, play this song, tell this story. And again, like all of our content and all the things we do at Nativity, and we'll talk about this in a minute with regard to weekend experience and a unified message, is we preach topically often on message series. There's a lot of value to that. But it's also tracks the liturgical calendar, and it's very scriptural based. And you can do the same thing at the children's liturgy of the word level that's happening in big church. So people are driving home and they can have a conversation. You're meeting everybody at their own age appropriate place, but you're all talking about the same thing on the ride home. So that's pretty powerful.
That is powerful. Well, I would love for us to transition into talking about the weekend experience. And I'm going to preface this question by saying I want everyone out there to visualize the worst weekend experience you've had at Mass, whether you were visiting a parish or it was maybe at your own, and just think about that from an outsider perspective on maybe somebody who came for the first time and that's the experience they had. And then think about the best one you've had and think about how that made you feel. And on that note, Ed, I'm going to ask you, why is the weekend experience a crucial part of the parish and why is it one of our anchors?
Why? Again, starting there. And I love that. We'll do that each time. Great. And on one level, I really want to, you said something that I want to come back to, but really when we're talking about the Mass, really the question is, we have to, of course, it's the source and summit of our faith. It's really what we're about as a Catholic parish, particularly, and so we ought to bring our very best to it, in every respect, in purely out of gratitude and thankfulness and honoring God. So it's the source and summit of our faith. So let's bring it, really, at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely.
Now, the other part is it's when people come and it's their experience with us and it's our opportunity to meet them. So let's, meet people where they are and let's let them have that awesome experience. And so we have to be ready for it in all respects. And so, the why is it's when our clients are coming, but most importantly, it's because it's the Mass and we should bring our very, very best to it.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great point, Ed. And we owe that to the Lord. That is our time for him. That is our time where we celebrate the Eucharist with him. And you're absolutely right. That is the time when people are coming in. That's when we see them. And you make such a great point. We can't not. We have to do this. We have to.
And we get to do this. That's
and
the other
we
part.
get to, yes. Oh my gosh, such a great point. We
Right.
get to do this. It's something to be celebrated.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about some of the resources that Rebuilt has to help with the weekend experience?
Well, remember that we talked about the big three, music, message, and ministry that, is the tagline for this weekend experience. And so there are resources, there are elements around this, but look, again, we're moving kind of into the how, right? In terms of the executing elements of the weekend experience. And I would say it begins with it really begins with the message. It begins with the homily. It begins with the pulpit. It begins with a unified message. Now, the word unified is important. A lot of the things that, when you think about the anchors, is kind of are kind of the culture and bringing everybody together and rowing in the same direction. And, you see that when we talk about a discipleship path and the various steps, when everybody's kind of moving in the same direction, right? It's a powerful place with regard to bringing the entire community together and moving in the same direction, is to preach in a unified message. At Nativity, we encourage the same homily at all Masses. We encourage the message series idea, and that's to preach topically over multiple weeks. And there's a lot of power in that. And through, you mentioned asking about resources at Rebuilt. All of these message series that we've been doing for years and years are available to anybody who's working with Rebuilt. And again, they track the liturgical calendar, what liturgical year are we in, what time of year, and you can go to that, and see examples of message series to be using that tracks that particular liturgical time of year. And a lot of good can come from preaching in a unified message around message series. And so I would say that, that's that's a primary and critical action step around the weekend. And it's also, there are resources available for that. But beyond that, the other executing elements of the weekend, I mean, we talk about music. Music should be played with skill, and music should be stirring. And you know, in a lot of Catholic parishes, and we're not here to criticize anything, but unfortunately, the music, you know, cannot be where it maybe should be, right? And so let's take it up a notch. And not necessarily the style of music you can play. You can play traditional music. You can play many types of music, family, folk. We use contemporary. But it just, as long as it's excellent and it's played with skill. And that's really important. You know, some of the other elements of the weekend mentioned ministers. You need to be raising up leaders in ministry. The ministers, you know, are so important from every aspect. Think about the newcomer coming onto your campus. How are they welcomed? How do they know where to go? How's your signage? How is the energy? You know, that welcoming vibe, that feel that ministers create. You know, you're striving there for, and I say the word vibe, an energy that people feel that they want to be a part of. Like, there's something here and I want some of this, right? That's really, and it's the ministry, it's the people that create that culture, that feel, that energy.
Yeah,
So those
absolutely.
are some of the elements there. The others are the importance, again, of an online. And we could talk about that, but it should just be exceptional. It should be exceptional because that's where people might check you out for the first time. It's also a way that can be some conversation about online church and its role, because of the importance of the Eucharist and the receiving the Eucharist in person, and we want to drive traffic to in person. At the same time, the reality is that a regular attendee might only be there 2 or 3 times a month, not 4. And so we stay connected through our online church. But it's also a place to meet people for the first time. And then you're doing things online that will drive them into your in-person church as well. So there's a place for the online that can be really, really powerful, so that you should, again, do it in an exceptional way.
Absolutely. And Ed, when I think about the impact that online church can have, I think about one of our staff members at Rebuilt who originally came to us because she was an online parishioner and joined a small group, and then ended up joining the Rebuilt ministry and was so passionate about it, became a part of our team and our staff. And when we think about the impact that that could have on parishes all over the country and the world, think about just that impact that you can make, where someone is so moved by what you're showing online that they become a member of your parish and get involved even in ministry, even if they're halfway around the country.
And online, we are certainly encouraging people to go to their local parish, but at the same time, yes, we can be a place for people far and wide through the online church. Yep.
Well, another question I have for you about this weekend experience: how does Rebuild ensure that the weekend experience is both welcoming to newcomers, you mentioned the newcomers, but also fulfilling for the insiders, those who have already been there, those current parishioners?
Well, for the and this is very good question, because I think there is a wonderful balance that you have to strike. But at the same time, by striking that balance, you're also, I think, reaching both. I think, you know, in your mass, in your language, in the vibe, in the welcoming, all that stuff, with an eye on the outsider, or on the newcomer, is a better way to say it. Yeah, you want to make sure your language is appropriate. You want to have a welcome. You want to be encouraging folks to come to your welcome desk. You want to have a welcome desk. You want to have a place where people can go. And you want to have that welcoming attitude and that energy and that vibe. That's important for the newcomer, but it's also important for your regular parishioners, right? They want to be a part of that and feel that week in and week out as well. So it is for both. Your language at Mass shouldn't alienate anybody. You know, you should probably instead of saying, well, we all know that, in this book of scripture, that, of course, we all know. Well, the newcomer may not know that. So maybe let's not say that. Let's describe, if we're reading a certain section, and, okay, this was written by so-and-so. And so to make that newcomer, and that's okay if you are reminding the old timer, that's okay in that moment. But the other thing that is, I think, important from a longstanding parishioner is to have a Mass experience that is also deep and rich for them. And at Nativity particularly, and what we encourage folks to do is try to reach a place of what we call progressive solemnity in your Mass. And that's, I think, what we really strive to do at Nativity. And I think and by that, I mean, you can have a sort of a rousing opening song, that's, kind of a little rambunctious or whatever. But as you move through the Mass, as you progress through the elements of the Mass, by the end of the Mass, by the liturgy of the Eucharist, our Mass is very rich. It's dark. There's one light on the altar. We're singing the Sanctus a cappella, in Latin, and it's the religious elements, the liturgical elements on the altar, all very rich. And that moment is very solemn, right? So progressive solemnity through the Mass. So you can have both and reach both, both the newcomer and, the longstanding parishioner, to maximize everybody's experience.
Thank you. Well, and as we talk about maximizing that experience, I think it's a great time to shift into that grow deeper anchor. And this isn't going to come as a surprise. I'm going to ask you, Ed, why is growing deeper so important?
Yeah, I think I think that there's a lot of wisdom, magic, genius, I think, in terms of this anchor, in a lot of respects. And we call back to discipleship. When we talk about growing deeper, what are we talking about? We're talking about becoming a deeper, fuller follower of Jesus. So how do we encourage people to do that? We as parish leaders, it's all about discipleship. It's all about growing deeper in our faith. So how are we encouraging? How are we, in fact, challenging our parishioners to go deeper in our faith? How are we encouraging them to go deeper in their faith? And, and remember, everything is about discipleship. So the why here is because, we are, we're called to discipleship and we're called to make disciples. And so we need to be encouraging them on their path, and that we need to be making clear what are the things that people can be doing to grow deeper in their faith. And then beyond that, it's not just to share what people can be doing, what are the practices that will help them grow deeper in their faith, but how can they do that? And what are the systems that we as parish leaders can put in place to help people go deeper in their faith? And so what are the specific practices, and then what are the systems that help them do that? And why do all of that? A couple of reasons. One, if we provide that clarity, people want to be led. People are looking for that leadership. So we should provide it as parish leadership. The other thing is, because if we do that, they're going to have confidence in our leadership. And that has so many tentacles of importance in terms of, what it will mean for the health of the parish, and to stimulate people in their giving and in their service and in the things in their engagement in the parish. So provide that clarity, give people that confidence, and to harness everybody. I mentioned earlier the cultural elements of moving in the same direction. If you shape a clear discipleship path for people, and if they get on that path, you're going to bring together the corporate body of the church, and you can do powerful ways in mission and ministry, and in many ways that everybody moving in the same direction can affect together. So there's a lot of whys to it, and this is a really powerful one. But it's not necessarily one that that a lot of parishes necessarily think about. They think about obviously the mass on the weekend, and they might think about some outreach activities, and they might have some things that they're doing that help people grow deeper, but they may not have necessarily kind of put it all together into a clear path for people to take. And that takes us to, how do you do that? And that takes us to a discipleship path. And that takes us to what we refer to as the steps of discipleship. And again, this is our idea for this. It doesn't have to be yours. You can have, but it's a pretty clean acronym, and it is a pretty clean idea about what the to-dos are. And we do have a lot of confidence in what these to-dos are. So we stand by steps pretty strongly, but it doesn't have to be your discipleship path in your parish. But we talk about the steps, STEPS. What are the practices that help you grow in your faith? And do you want to go through those?
I would love that.
We have
Could
the
you
time
please
for that?
share that framework around steps, and then maybe how people could implement these in their own parishes?
Okay. Well, and what's interesting is that as we talk through them, a lot of them, this is a switch that can go on. If you can pull this off, the power that you can harness in your parish, if you can flip this switch, and here's the switch I'm talking about. The first S in steps is we call upon people to serve in ministry or in missions, but Jesus came not to be served, but to serve. And if we're disciples of Jesus and we want to be like Jesus, we want to serve. And we serve, and here's the switch, not because the pastor needs somebody to open the door, or we don't serve because the church needs my service, although it does. We serve because we're going to grow as a disciple when we do. So the invitation from the pulpit or from staff to the congregation to encourage people to serve is not because we need you to serve. It's because you are going to grow as a disciple when you serve. And so that's the switch. If you can pull off that cultural switch in the minds of people, then the servers will follow, and you'll have the servers that you need to effect great ministry across the spectrum of the parish. So serve as Jesus
Such a great
served.
point.
That's the S. The same kind of thing happens with the T, which is tithe and give. Again, now I have to be careful here. I'm the stewardship director. My own personal faith walk is very tied to my relationship with money. And, that switch for me was an important one for my own personal discipleship, for my own personal faith walk. But again, if you can flip the switch here culturally, at a parish, we are not in the business of raising money. We are in the business of raising givers who give because they're a disciple. And because 16 of 39 parables are about money and possessions. Jesus talked a lot about money. He knew he was in competition with stuff for our hearts. So he spoke a lot about it. And so we need to embrace that idea that we need to get our heart right around money. And that does start with giving. And so when you give, you are relying on God to give that to you later when you need it, right? It's all God's anyway. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, Psalm 24. And we can talk about what we call the 4 P's of giving. There's language around all of that, making giving part of your plan. It should be a priority in that plan. We need to teach people to be percentage givers and then to grow or progress in their giving over time. Those are the 4 P's. I teach in Rebuilt a course on finance and stewardship. And I guess a couple of semesters ago, someone said, Ed, there's a 5th P. You need to be praying about your giving. Exactly. So I like to throw in that 5th P because we do want to make that a spiritual moment and be praying about our giving. So in any event, this is the language around this anchor. The tithing or giving is what a disciple does. And so, again, that's the switch. Let's raise givers, and the money will follow. So that's the P, that's the T. The E is engage in small groups. We need to be around fellow believers. So join a small group community where you will grow together in your faith. It's also the place where a lot of the pastoral care in a parish can be delivered through that small group vehicle where big church gets small. That's powerful. The P is we need to practice our faith, prayer and the sacraments. So as parish leaders, how do we help people into a daily prayer life? Maybe you encourage them with a daily devotional. And of course, we have the sacraments. People should be encouraged in the sacraments. And then share your faith with others. That's the second S in steps. And I guess a primary thing there is, again, that invest and invite idea. Again, here's a place where the anchors come together. And so I won't reiterate all that, but encouraging people to share your faith, because when you tell your story, your own story grows. And when you share it, what the gospel has meant for you, you're going to grow in your faith. And again, that's the switch, right? When you do these steps, this is about your personal growth. It's not because the church needs anything from you. It's what they want for you.
That's such a great point, Ed. What the church wants for you. And as you were talking through all of these steps, I just got excited because we're in a really interesting time right now where Father Michael and Tom just published the book Rebuilt Faith, and that is all about the steps. And this is not a plug for the book Rebuilt Faith, although I think it's excellent and I encourage everyone
Go ahead,
to
make the
read
plug.
it.
It's okay.
But each section walks you through each of the steps, and Ed just did a beautiful job giving us that synopsis. But if you are looking for that transformation for yourself, and then my goodness, what a transformation can happen in your parish when you get your parish on board with these steps. We've seen it from the different parishes that we help to coach and guide. And wow, is it just incredible when people do start growing deeper in their faith, what can happen.
We work with a parish in Mullick Hill, New Jersey, and Woodstown, New Jersey. Couple parishes come together, Church of the Holy Spirit, and it's I'm blessed to work with them directly, and they just through the Lenten season did Rebuild Faith as a parish, and then the pastor came alongside that with a daily blog, and they had devotionals and. They're laying the groundwork. They have not yet implemented. They're brand new with us. They haven't implemented the steps per se in the parish, but they're laying that groundwork for it. And Rebuilt Faith was a wonderful way to do that while doing a Lenten campaign together as a community. You want to look for ways to do a campus-wide campaign to bring the whole community together. So yeah, steps and discipleship path really critical. Do you want to move on to leadership?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Well, in what way does Rebuilt help to prioritize leadership and help parishes understand what they need to do in leadership?
Interestingly, if you go back, I mentioned the history of Rebuilt and being there from the beginning, and Tom and I kind of talked about these sort of anchors, and we have new representation of all this, but leadership, interestingly, early on wasn't necessarily one of our anchors. We've added it in recent years. So it's our most recent, but it's really, really important. We've grown. But everybody says that, right? Everything rises and falls on leadership. It's all about leadership. And that's true. And so what was our value added to that? What could we really bring to the table with regard to speaking about leadership? And I think, the nugget here is, yes, it's very important to have a senior team, and leadership starts at the top and sort of a shared passion for the work of the local parish. But at the end of the day, it all happens through a community of leaders, layers of leadership throughout the organization. So our parish framework for leadership is to be thinking about it in layers fashion, that it starts at the top, who then empower and authorize staff, who then empower, importantly, and authorize and delegate to ministry leaders who then become leaders of teams below them. And it really is important to view leadership in the parish that way, through a community of leaders and layers of leadership, because not only do we want to be having effective ministry throughout, and that's going to happen if people are involved. But we also want to provide those opportunities to serve to people and to give people those places where they can engage in the parish and be serving in the parish. So leadership is structural throughout parish life. We have to be very mindful of, as parish leaders, not doing everything and not trying to take ownership of everything because we want to get it done and we want to make sure Sunday's great and it's up to us to do that. Our job as parish leaders is to be leaders, not necessarily doers.
Oh my
Be
gosh,
putting in
absolutely.
place these layers of leadership and encouraging our staff to invite people into ministry and to become leaders of those ministries and to build teams under them. We're talking about 4 and 5 layers deep here, right? And that's really where it happens. And so that's our thoughts with regard to leadership, is that building of a leadership community. And the critical words are delegation and empowerment. You have to both be comfortable delegating, but then also giving people the authority to own it and run with it, and to champion the work that they're doing and to build teams under them. And remember, that's biblical too, right?
Yeah.
In terms of Exodus 18, Jethro saying to Moses, dude, you're doing it wrong, right? And and so that there is strong scriptural underpinning for doing exactly that.
And
Build teams.
I'm just thinking about our listeners out there who are listening or watching us on YouTube and who are burned out, because let's be real, working in a parish is hard work. A lot of times we're understaffed, underfunded, and the best way to make some of these changes in leadership is to build those layers of leaders and delegate. And Ed, you've got a great point. When you delegate and then empower those to run with it, my goodness, I've seen just volunteer receptionists loving what they're doing and loving that they can come in and serve a couple days a week and really own that area and take on more responsibility. And every time you empower somebody like that, you're allowing them to serve within their giftings, which is huge. That's that first step in the steps right there. But also then you're taking that pressure off of the parish staff, which makes a tremendous difference. So for those of you out there working in parish life, we hear you, we get you, we know it is so hard, but trust us when we say, when you build these layers of leaders, so much starts to change, and some of that weight can just come right off of your shoulders.
Well said. I can't improve on that. Amen. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Well, Ed, while we're talking about leaders, can you please share with us what are maybe some of those qualities or characteristics in leaders we're looking for?
Well, I think the buy-in, if you will, to the culture and the direction you're going, I think that's important. And I want to say here that the direction you're going isn't necessarily like all of the things we're talking about. It's like what's particularly important in your community for the health of your parish, and what are the things that we talk about that are critically important for you, and that make your parish the best it can be, right? And so whatever that culture is that you're striving for, but let's be intentional about what it is, and put in place people who have full buy-in and who are ready to be advocates and ambassadors for everything you're doing. So buy-in is critical, and passion and love of the Lord and love of discipleship, and sort of those are the critical elements, certainly. And then at the leadership level, it's to be comfortable with the delegation and the willingness and desire to build teams and to bring people into service and into community. And that it's not about them to own their ministry. It's about them to lead their ministry and to bring people into it. So you don't want any kind of islands. You don't want any kind of this is my work. This is an idea that everybody buys into: discipleship and community and growing as disciples. Yep.
Such a great point. And you mentioned that empowerment. What are some ways that we can empower those leaders so that we can feel comfortable delegating to them?
Yeah, we want to I guess grow these leaders and feed them and lean into them by a couple ways to do that. I mean, at Nativity and through Rebuilt, we certainly advocate um, ministry nights and bringing your leaders together in worship nights and in celebration and so I don't want to call it like continuing ed, but be casting vision to this team and to be giving them their why and to feeling that community of fellowship together as leaders. So bring them together on the weekend, serve them. We have a ministry suite. We advocate, giving them their place, a place for them to come together and because you're asking a lot for people to come and serve and plus attend mass. And so let's have a place where we provide some coffee and donuts free for them and that they can have community and where they come together before serving and pray together and just have that sense of community. So, and then maybe have a first serve experience that's very good when somebody signs up to serve, have them have a buddy that kind of walks them through it. But then on an ongoing basis, that idea of staff can be regularly meeting with and sort of coaching or just being with their leaders on a regular basis. These are all ways that you can, lean into your ministers and help them grow, help them feel loved and appreciated, and make your ministries the best they can be that way.
That's so good. One of the parts of the book that I'll never forget is that volunteers aren't free. But Ed, you just did a great job of sharing how we can pour into them, so that way they do feel that love and respect and gratitude from us, so that they continue on that journey.
Awesome. Exactly.
Well, let's tie it up. So, what impact have you seen when parishes implement these four strategic anchors?
Well, I think the big one is kind of that idea of culture change and that idea of engagement and that idea of energy. It looks different at different places, and this is not a program. This is not one shoe fits all. These are universal ideas that you can implement, in your parish, and the fruit will be, forthcoming from it. And it might be in increased attendance, it might be or in increased offertory or in increased engagement in the parish or, so there are metrics to measure, and we encourage that with our parishes and talk about those things. But it's going to look different in different places. And at the end of the day, we're not in the business here of trying to create something specific. We're trying to encourage parishes to be the best they can be in their community, in their mission field, in their zip code. And given their circumstances and their socioeconomic conditions and their demographics and but at the end of the day, these are universal ideas. And we're blessed to have, many, success stories and war stories. And it's a joy to be a part of this work.
It's such a great point, Ed, because I think a misconception that might be out there is that we want to help other parishes become like Nativity. We want to make mini nativities out there. And that's not the case at all. When my parish began coaching, I'll never forget my first meeting with my coach. He said, "We are not trying to make St. Mary's a little nativity. We are trying to make St. Mary's the best St. Mary's it can be. We're going to help you with this framework, but your parish will retain its own identity, its own personality." And I think that's so important for our listeners to understand that we're not trying to conform any parish to be exactly like Nativity. We just want to help you with the framework and then apply it where it makes sense in your own parish.
Absolutely. And so that framework, can be, again, thinking about sort of how to engage with Rebuilt, or thinking about, what a next step might be, there are lots of ways to engage with us. And we, in the same way of trying to think about each parish and meeting them where they are and who they are, we have many different ways to engage with parishes, and it can start by just kind of reading the Rebuilt library of books, right? But then we have weekly webinars. We call them workshops. People can engage that way. We can visit your parish and do an analysis, if you will. We can you can bring Rebuilt people out for speaking engagements. You can look at some courses online and just sort of take them at your own pacing. I'm going sort of up the trajectory of sort of depth of engagement, right? You might identify a person on your staff to work with us in coaching. Maybe it's just one, or maybe it's the pastor and his senior team and all engaged in coaching in a sort of a full-blown coaching relationship. So there are many ways to get engaged with us, and we'd love the opportunity to be engaged with lots of parishes in any way that makes sense for each respective parish.
Well said. Well, Ed, as we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share about the strategic anchors?
I think that at the end of the day, these are universal ideas. This is an ongoing, the work of the parish is, I said it earlier, an eternal game. And, Christ loves his church. He wants the best for it. We want the best for churches. We're called to go make disciples. We're called to grow. We're called to be the best version of ourselves. And so, these anchors are exactly that. They are traits that great churches share. And so view them as universal, but also don't be intimidated by them. And also understand that the implementation of these ideas may take a little time, and seeing the fruit may take a little time. A Catholic parish can be an aircraft carrier, right? And sometimes it's hard to turn it, but you make those adjustments, and you see over time sort of the fruit of those adjustments. And so these universal ideas, you can do this. Don't be intimidated by it. And it's worthwhile. It's what we're called to do and what we get to do.
Well said. Well, Ed, thank you so much for joining us today. You did an incredible job explaining the anchors and the why and the how. And we're just so grateful that our listeners get to take part in this. And I would just, in closing, like to remind them that everything Ed talked about today will be in our show notes. So please check those out for the free download on the anchors, along with the details in each of those flywheels. Well, thank you, and we can't wait to talk to you next time.